a strong economy, a cohesive society, sound public finances. These are not accidental achievements. They are the result of decades of hard choices made by generations of Singaporeans. Upward mobility remains central to our social compact. Because here in Singapore, your starting point should never determine your finishing position. This year we tabled the largest budget in our history, larger than the 5 budgets combined in 2020 to fight COVID. Growth alone will not automatically translate into job opportunities across the board. We must also uplift the broader domestic economy, raising productivity, wages, and career pathways across the services sector. In this regard, SMEs play a critical role. They employ many Singaporeans and anchor economic activity across our island. The 2 SME segments under greater pressure are retail and F&B, food and beverage. The largest components of their operating expenditure are the cost of goods and materials, labor, and rent. Rent increases for retail spaces have trended below nominal GDP growth and inflation in the last few years. Rental costs have also declined as a share of total business cost. Of course, market rents vary by property type and location. Individual tenants may face higher rent increases at renewals, and we are mindful of these cases. Where government agencies are landlords, like HDB and JTC, and where we have direct oversight, like in hawker centres, we have frameworks to keep rents fair and competitive, and we will continue reviewing and updating these frameworks. Another powerful force reshaping our economy is artificial intelligence, or AI. Historically, every major technological wave has displaced some jobs, but also created new ones. Indeed, what we have seen in Singapore so far is that AI can augment jobs and help workers achieve more, even as it automates certain tasks. So, thus far, the evidence does not point to widespread displacement. But as many members have highlighted, there are emerging pressures, and we recognize that. We cannot rely only on today's data. We will work closely with our tripartite partners, especially NTUC, to realize these shared goals. What does this mean in practical terms? For example, as we develop champions of AI and implement our national AI missions, we will not only just help companies transform, we will capture value in Singapore. Every sector is different, and how they use AI and the impact on workers in each sector will vary. And that's why we are coordinating all of these efforts through the National AI Council, aligning industry transformation and workforce upgrading to ensure that AI uplifts our workers. That is our assurance. And that's why our strategy going ahead is clear. We will not have jobless growth in Singapore. Some have observed that the transfers in this year's budget are smaller than last year. But in fact, support in this budget remains substantial and broader in scope. The facts are, only about 5% of our overall budget is for one-off measures. That was so in FY 2025, and it is so in FY 2026. The remaining 95%, the overwhelming share, is for longer-term and structural schemes. Total social spending has increased this year. It has not gone down. We are providing more help for Singaporeans. And our approach is not just to cushion the costs, because the durable solution to cost pressures is steady, sustainable wage increases. But when we look at data at both the household and the individual worker levels, household and workers, in fact, incomes have risen faster than inflation over the past decades across the entire income distribution. We pursue broad-based wage growth, but wage increases have to be supported by skills upgrading and productivity improvements. And at the same time, the government bears a substantial share of the cost of essential services through subsidies and transfers with more support for lower and middle-income households. Encouragingly, in Singapore, income inequality has narrowed compared to a decade ago. Lower and middle-income workers have seen faster real income growth than those at the top. Without this inclusive growth, I have no doubt that the cost pressures that we are feeling on the ground would have been far worse. It's very easy to say, let's tax the rich more, but capital and talent are mobile. And if we rely solely on ever higher taxes for this segment, eventually the broad middle will also have to shoulder the burden, and we risk undermining competitiveness, enterprise, and job creation. Redistribution alone cannot build a strong and resilient society. So our approach is balanced. We keep taxes moderate but progressive. We redistribute resources to those with greater needs, and we complement that with heavy investments in human capital, early childhood education, quality schooling, and tertiary education, as well as lifelong learning through Skills Future. Upward mobility remains central to our social compact, because here in Singapore, your starting point should never determine your finishing position. Many advanced economies are now carrying record high levels of public debt. And as debt rises, so will borrowing costs. Over time, this constrains fiscal flexibility and weakens longer-term growth potential for these economies. Against this backdrop, Singapore's strong fiscal position is a strategic advantage. At the beginning of this decade, we knew that healthcare spending would rise sharply in line with our rapidly aging population. This was structural, not cyclical. And healthcare was not the only area where spending pressures were increasing. We had estimated that healthcare alone would require additional funding of 0.6% to 1.2% of GDP. The question was how to fund this. And we studied a range of options. And in the end, the GST was the only broad-based and sustainable option to fund rising healthcare needs while preserving our reserves framework. Could we have relied instead on corporate income tax collections? But remember, back in 2022, when we made the decision on the GST, there was no sign that corporate income tax collections would rise so significantly. At that time, discussions on BEPS were still evolving. The eventual outcomes and their revenue implications were far from certain. It would not have been responsible to fund permanent healthcare commitments using revenue sources that were uncertain and can yet dry up. The corporate income tax collections only started rising towards the end of FY 2023 and have stayed elevated until now. This outcome was not anticipated. And this brings us to the issue of fiscal marksmanship. It's perhaps my favorite topic because I've shared before I started work in MOF doing precisely this, fiscal projections. Our forecast deviations are within a reasonable range, comparable to other advanced economies. Within this range of variation, revenues in recent years have indeed come in above projections. Is that because we were overly conservative? The short answer is no. Our projections are prepared by MOF economists using the best available data at the start of each financial year, including GDP growth assumptions at that time. But for a small, open economy like Singapore, growth outcomes can diverge significantly from forecasts as global conditions evolve because we are so dependent on the external environment. Forecasting Singapore's GDP growth is like forecasting the world's GDP growth, which is very, very difficult to do. So let us not belittle these contributions just to score a political point. The fact that we are in a better position today than our projections is something we should all welcome. It's good news for Singapore and Singaporeans. Earlier, MOF had projected that government spending could reach 20% of GDP by 2030. But if you look at the trends, since emerging from COVID, expenditure has been growing by an average of $10 billion every year, and we expect our needs to rise even more for the coming years in this term of government. So government spending is likely to exceed 20% of GDP well before 2030. And we enter this new era with considerable strengths: a strong economy, a cohesive society, sound public finances. These are not accidental achievements. They are the result of decades of hard choices made by generations of Singaporeans. So this budget builds on that strong foundation. The world may be more uncertain, but we are prepared. We are united, and together we will shape our own destiny and secure a brighter future for every Singaporean. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.